Mrs. Callaghan again took up her parable. "I told him first and last I'd lose me life if I had to go into the court, and if I did itself, sure the tourneys would rip no more out of me than what he did himself." "Did you tell him where was Bat?" inquired Flurry casually. At this Mrs. Callaghan immediately dissolved into tears. "Is it Bat?" she howled. "If the 12 Apostles came down from heaven asking me where was Bat, I could give them no satisfaction. The divil un know I know what's happened to him. He came home with me sober and good natured from the regatta, and the next morning he axed a fresh egg for his breakfast, and God forgive me, I wouldn't break the score I was taking to the hotel. And with that he slapped the cup of tea into the fire and went out the door, and I never got a word of him since, good nor bad. God knows 'tis I got trouble with that poor boy, and he the only one I have to look to in the world." I cut the matter short by asking her what she wanted me to do for her, and sifted out from among much extraneous detail the fact that she relied upon my renowned wisdom and clemency to preserve her from being called as a witness at the coming inquiry. The gift of the goose served its intended purpose of embarrassing my position, but in spite of it I broke to the Widow Callaghan my inability to help her. She did not, of course, believe me, but she was too well bred to say so. In Ireland one becomes accustomed to this attitude. As it turned out, however, Bat Callaghan's mother had nothing to fear from the inquiry. She was by turns deaf, imbecile, garrulously candid, and furiously abusive of Murray's principal witness, a frightened lad of 17, who had sworn to having seen Bat Callaghan and Jimmy Foley shaping at one another to fight, at an hour when, according to Mrs. Callaghan, Bat was lying "stretched on the beddeen with a sick stomach," in consequence of the malignant character of the porter supplied by the last witness's father. It all ended, as such cases so often do in Ireland, in complete moral certainty in the minds of all concerned as to the guilt of the accused, and entire impotence on the part of the law to prove it. A warrant was issued for the arrest of Bartholomew Callaghan, and the clans of Callaghan and Foley fought rather more bloodily than usual, as occasion served; and at intervals during the next few months Murray used to ask me if my friend the murderer had dropped in lately, to which I was wont to reply with condolences on the failure of the R.I.C. to find the Widow Callaghan's only son for her, and that was about all that came of it. Events with which the present story has no concern took me to England towards the end of the following March. It so happened that my old regiment, the Fusiliers, was quartered at Wincastle, within a couple of hours by rail of Philippa's home, where I was staying; and since my wedding was now within measurable distance, my former brothers in arms invited me over to dine and sleep, and to receive a valedictory silver claret jug that they were magnanimous enough to bestow upon a backslider. I enjoyed the dinner as much as any man can enjoy his dinner when he knows he has to make a speech at the end of it. Through much and varied conversation I strove, like a nervous mother who cannot trust her offspring out of her sight, to keep before my mind's eye the opening sentences that I had composed in the train. I felt that if I could only get away satisfactorily, I might trust the Ayala (89) to do the rest; and of that fount of inspiration there was no lack. As it turned out, I got away all right, though the sight of the double line of expectant faces and red mess jackets nearly scattered those precious opening sentences, and I am afraid that, so far as the various subsequent points went that I had intended to make, I stayed away. However, neither Demosthenes nor a Nationalist member at a Cork election could have been listened to with more gratifying attention, and I sat down, hot and happy, to be confronted with my own flushed visage, hideously reflected in the glittering paunch of the claret jug. Once safely over the presentation, the evening mellowed into frivolity, and it was pretty late before I found myself settled down to whist at sixpenny points in the ancient familiar way, while most of the others fell to playing pool in the billiard room next door. I have played whist from my youth up, with the preternatural seriousness of a subaltern, with the self assurance of a senior captain, with the privileged irascibility of a major; and my 18 months of abstinence at Sherlane had only whetted my appetite for what I consider the best of games. After the long lonely evenings there, with rats for company, and for relaxation a deck of that specially demoniacal American form of patience known as Fooly Ann, It was wondrous agreeable to sit again amongst my fellows, and to lay the longs on a severely scientific rubber of whist, as though Mrs. Cadogan and the Skibourne bench of magistrates had never existed. We were in the first game of the second rubber, and I was holding a very nice playing hand. I had early in the game moved forth my trumps to battle, and I was now in the ineffable position of scoring with the small cards of my long suit. The cards fell, and fell in silence, and Ballantyne, my partner, raked in the tricks like a machine. The concentrated quiet of the game was suddenly arrested by a sharp, unmistakable sound from the barrack yard outside, the snap of a Lee Metford rifle. "What was that?" exclaimed Moffat, the senior major. Before he had finished speaking, there was a second shot. "By Jove, those were rifle shots. Perhaps I'd better go and see what's up," said Ballantyne, who was captain of the week, throwing down his cards and making a bolt for the door. He had hardly got out of the room when the first long high note of the "Assembly" sang out sudden and clear. We all sprang to our feet, and as the bugle call went shrilly on, the other men came pouring in from the billiard room and stampeded to their quarters to get their swords. At the same moment the mess sergeant appeared at the outer door, with a face as white as his shirt front. "The sentry on the magazine guard has been shot, sir," he said excitedly to Moffat. "They say he's dead." We were all out in the barrack square in an instant. It was clear moonlight, and the square was already alive with hurrying figures, cramming on clothes and caps as they ran to fall in. I was a free agent these times, and I followed the mess sergeant across the square towards the distant corner where the magazine stands. As we doubled round the end of the men's quarters, we nearly ran into a small party of men who were advancing slowly and heavily in our direction. "Here he is, sir," said the mess sergeant, stopping himself abruptly. They were carrying the sentry to the hospital. His busby had fallen off, the moon shone mildly on his pale, convulsed face, and foam and strange inhuman sounds came from within his lips. His head was rolling from side to side on the arm of one of the men who was carrying him. As it turned towards me, I was struck by something disturbingly familiar in the face, and I wondered if he had been in my old company. "What's his name, sergeant?" I said to the mess sergeant. "Private Harris, sir," replied the sergeant. "He's only lately come up from the depot, and this was his first time on sentry by himself." I went back to the mess, and in the process of time the others straggled in, thirsting for whiskies and soda, and full of such information as there was to give. Private Harris was not wounded. Both the shots had been fired by him, as was testified by the state of his rifle and the fact that two of the cartridges were missing from the packet in his pouch. "I hear he was a queer, sulky sort of chap always," said Tomkinson, the subaltern of the day. "But if he was having a try at suicide, he made a bally bad fist of it." "He made as good a fist of it as you did on putting on your sword, Tommy," remarked Ballantyne, indicating a dangling white strap of webbing that hung down like a tail below Mr. Tomkinson's mess jacket. "Nerves, obviously, in both cases." The exquisite satisfaction afforded by this discovery to Mr. Tomkinson's brother officers found its natural outlet in a bear fight that threatened to become more or less general, and in the course of which I slid away unostentatiously to bed in Ballantyne's quarters and took the precaution of barricading my door. Next morning, when I got down to breakfast, I found Ballantyne and two or three others in the mess room, and my first inquiry was for Private Harris. "Oh, the poor chap's dead," said Ballantyne. "It's a very queer business altogether. I think he must have been wrong in the top story. The doctor was with him when he came to out of the fit, or whatever it was, and O'Reilly that's the doctor, you know, Irish, of course. And, by the way, poor Harris was an Irishman too says that he could only gibber at first, but then he got better, and he got out of him that when he had been on sentry go for about half an hour, he happened to look up at the angle of the barrack wall near where it joins the magazine tower, and saw a face looking at him over it. He challenged and got no answer, but the face just stuck there staring at him. He challenged again, and then, as O'Reilly said, he just up with his rifle and blazed at it." Ballantyne was not above the common English delusion that he could imitate an Irish brogue. "Well, what happened then?" "Well, according to the poor devil's own story, the face just kept looking at him. and he